Capital is to fly turbulence and strife, and to be timid, which is very true, but this is very incompletely stating the question. Capital eschews no profit, of a very small profit. Just as nature was formerly said to abhor a vacuum with adequate profit, capital is very bold. A certain 10% will ensure its employment anywhere. 20% certain will produce eagerness. 50% positive audacity. 100% will make it ready to trample on all human laws. 300%, and there's not a crime at which it will scruple, nor a risk it will not run, even to the chance of its owner being hanged. If turbulence and strife will bring a profit, it will freely encourage both. Smuggling and the slave trade have amply proved all that is here stated. Hello from England. I have not found evidence that the book, sent by mail from a great schemer to Alexander Ivanovich Koreko, called Capitalist Sharks, Biography of American Millionaires, the first phrase of which is all major modern state earned, the most dishonest way, was circled in blue pencil, existed. It is understandable, Ilf and Petrov, as writers, they can. But the book, a quote from which I cited in the beginning, there is actually. It leaves Marx in Capital and provides a link to the source, which can easily be found. This is understandable too. Marx was a scientist, or so says Professor Kazanov, is a luminary of science, and all footnotes in his works are neat. The book is a small booklet called Unions and Strikes, Their Philosophy and Intention. It was published in 1860 by the author, Thomas Dunning, and sold for 1 shilling. I think it would be fair to know more about the person who gave such an accurate description of booming capitalism and the Industrial Revolution in Britain. In a nutshell, it showed that a shark is the essence of capitalism. The basis of any major capital is criminal. Thomas Dunning died the 23rd of December 1873, leaving to his wife a little less than £100. These funds were the proceeds from the reissue of his brochure about strikes. Beyond these gates, Abney Park Cemetery. Somewhere is the place where Thomas Dunning is buried, but despite the fact that I knew the exact location of the burial, I was not able to find it. The house in which lived the Thomas Dunning family now no longer exists. Almost all members of the household, including his daughter, were working as bookbinders for bread, as he was. It is not surprising because at the time, if you were a turner, you and your children would be turners. If a gardener, then gardeners, etc. If you were unemployed and living on benefits, it's likely that this fate awaited your offspring. Nothing changes. But the name of the street that was the home of the Thomas Dunning family, much has changed. Now it's not Napier Street, but Napier Grove. But I could not see one tree anywhere. Nothing here remains to show that some 40 years ago it was a typical urban landscape with 2 rows of terraced houses, windows facing each other. However, standing nearby the old house are some original buildings, but this is Edwardiana. A mile from here, Goswell Street, the street on which Dunning, returning from a meeting of the Union in which he participated, was knocked down by a light trap, according to police. He recovered from the shock in the hospital St. Bartholomew's, where he spent 8 weeks but was never able to recover from his injuries. Despite this, Dunning continued to edit the trade union newspaper, but had to resign from the post of secretary of the Trade Union of Bookbinders, to which he had been elected many times. Thomas Dunning was born at the end of the 18th century in 1799 in London. About the early years of his life, little is known, or what preceded his entry into the Union of Bookbinders, where he soon began to play a leading role, with a high degree of reliability. In England, in the early 19th century, was a rapidly developing industrial production of books and bookbinding businesses. Dunning initially worked as a journeyman bookbinder, and then master after studying for 7 years. By the way, the great English scientist Faraday also started a bookbinder business. A curious young man who not only had them bound but also found time to read them. Maybe it was the impetus of Faraday that we began to educate ourselves. But back to Thomas Dunning. Dunning is one of the leaders of trade unions and one of the most influential leaders, Secretary of the Union of Bookbinders. He edited several newspapers, participated in discussions, reprinted in periodicals, and not only this, he takes part in strikes, sometimes deprived of this for his livelihood. The employer at this time could simply discard strikers from work. This happened, for example, in 1839. However, the result was a consolidation of several small London unions, bookbinders, into one, and soon they became the Union of Bookbinders, covering the entire country. It was headed by Thomas Dunning. Dunning continues to participate in strikes. His work often helped to formulate the strikers' demands to the employer. Many collaborations with newspapers, he wrote and edited materials on hot topics of the time. He did a lot of writing on behalf of his union that were published. He wrote the essay, The Philosophy of Trade Unionism. It was the answer to the baseless lies about trade unions which fell upon the inhabitants from the deceitful and corrupt media. The main voice in this chorus was Quarterly Review, the mouthpiece of the Liberals. Essays produced an extraordinary sensation. It was discussed not only in the press, but in open discussions where they invited Dunning to speak. Soon, on behalf of the Union, Dunning writes essays, Unions and Strikes, Their Philosophy and Intention, wherein it was made forceful argument with Quarterly Review exploring the issue. This work caused a flurry of discussions. Judging by the numbers of publications in the press and how active a part Dunning took in the struggle of workers for their rights in the construction of the Union, Dunning had an incredible capacity for work, but he still had time to participate in free concerts as a performer. He had a good bass voice and could play violin and organ. Anyway, his friends, years later, reminisced about it. It's not surprising, therefore, that almost all serious studies of the Industrial Revolution in England and the history of the labour movement and trade unions always mentions the Union of Bookbinders and Thomas Dunning. And not only is mentioned, since the 70s of the last century in the UK, published a huge encyclopedic dictionary, the Dictionary of Labour Biography. It includes biographies of the leaders of the labour movement in the UK in the 19th and 20th centuries. An article about Thomas Dunning occupies an honourable place in it. Unfortunately, I failed to find a single image of Thomas Dunning. His friends said that he was a great photographer, but next to the Historic Centre, which houses the library and one of the archives, I found the Fire Brigade. Convenient. Last year in Glasgow was burned a valuable library of the School of Arts. In another library I found the book, as I supposed, with a biography and a photograph of Thomas Dunning. But it was another Thomas Dunning, a contemporary of our Dunning, also a union leader. However, he was a working shoemaker. And this is not surprising. Dunning was a common surname in Britain, as Holmes and Watson, as in Russia, Pronin and Popov. So there's nothing strange about it, is that some of them become famous. Although one of the archivists assured me that I had no chance to find the portrait of Dunning, I do not lose hope. Still interesting to see what he looked like. Thomas Dunning, organiser, practitioner and passionate advocate, a man who devoted his life to the workers' movement. With love from England.